best and simplest opening bar of the year. He says, concise but intriguing.
Go subscribe, yeah, subscribe.
Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to Brews and Reviews. It's Knowledge. Thank you for joining me for part 2 of my review of Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, Kendrick Lamar's new album, stepping right into it. The first track on this side is called Count Me Out, and the mental health themes established on the first side are even more developed here, as he includes renowned self-help writer Eckhart Tolle saying Mr. Duckworth, and his wife Whitney says session 10, breakthrough. We know that we're in for some real therapy on this side, and it will be a journey of self-discovery for Kendrick. And the lyrics on this see Kenny start to cope with some of his trauma by first shedding the defense mechanism of his ego and pride. Interesting that pride and lust come up so much on this album and are portrayed as negative outcomes of his personal trauma, since pride and lust were also the names of standout tracks on his previous album, Damn. That's kind of where we see him developing some of his vices. During that album, 5 years later, he's coping with it. And I love the sound of this when the bass kicks in for the chorus. Disc 2 is really well produced. Crown. This is definitely one of the standout tracks. The beat, the only one with just one producer, in Timothy Duval, and he creates a beautiful piano melody for Kendrick to mostly harmonize on. And this continues some of the focus, as I mentioned on my review of disc 1, that people were looking for him to become a de facto leader during the movement after George Floyd's killing, but he was protesting in his own way. And that's something that'll come up throughout disc 2 as well, is this feeling that he should be a savior or some kind of activist or spokesperson for the black community just because he's a celebrity. But he sets it straight on the chorus of this. He says, I can't please everybody. This could also be about people begging him to drop a project over the last 5 years, like he owes us anything more than what he had already given us. There is a nice shout out to the fans in verse 2 though, saying, they idolize and praise your name across the nation. Tap the feet and nod the head for confirmation. Promise that you keep the music in rotation. That's what I call love. Though when we get to the outro where he consistently repeats again, I can't please everybody, you realize that this may be why he had writer's block for so long, in that he was overwhelmed just trying to please everybody or thinking about the expectations that they placed on them. And he actually has an answer to this at the end of the album. Silent Hill. Sonically, side 2 is much more chill and somber than they were in disc 1, which featured such tracks as We Cry Together, an argument playing out, rhyming back and forth, very chaotic, but these are very melodic songs. Don't think that's by mistake. The shift in tone symbolizes K-Dot presenting his problems on the first half, but dealing with them, coping with them internally, and eventually coming to peace with them on side 2. I'm not really a fan of Kodak Black, and he sounds a little ahead of the beat on this, but the voice fits, and I think his self-inflicted legal troubles are really why Oklama chose to include him on the album, further outlining the concept that trauma leads to violence, anger, and lust, and other problems. And Kodak even says himself, every Sunday's Son's Day, teach my boy to be a man, I ain't had no father, fell in love with the block, I ain't have no pop, just a sawed-off shotgun, Mossberg. So this becomes an actual personification of the idea that Kendrick expressed on Father Time, where he said, my ain't got no daddy, grow up overcompensating, learn shit about being a man and disguise it as being gangsta. Savior Interlude. Both interludes are solo joints for Kendrick's guest. Baby Keem handles this one. Lyrically, this is probably better than anything on Keem's album. It displays a really nice flow too, and this reminds me why the melodic blue was so anticipated. He fumbled the bag a bit on that one, but he's back on my good side after this verse. He continues the themes of mental health that we're hearing throughout the album, especially on side 2. After Eckhart Tolle talks about a victim mentality that arises from bad things happening to people in childhood, Keem exemplifies this by listing the bad things that happened in his own childhood. He says, "You ever seen your mama strung out while you studied division? Your uncle ever stole from you day after Christmas? Seen both of those in the county jail visits, the 1st and the 15th, the only religion." And coming back to the victim mentality later on in the verse, he says, "My uncle would tell me the shit in the movies could only be magic. This year I did 43 shows and took it all home to buy him a casket." His uncle played the victim role his entire life until he died, and he didn't even really get to see Keem break that generational curse. That's something that K-Dot will come back to later on, but then we get right into Savior, much more of the idea of how people elevate celebrities to Messiah-type statuses. The pressure of these high expectations may have been what led to Kendrick's hiatus, as he reiterates continuously on this song that he is not a savior, and he supports the black community in his own way. And it shouldn't have to be always an outward showing or by being a leader. He says, "Yeah, Tupac dead, gotta think for yourself. Yeah, heroes looking for the villains to help." Even for someone that he looked up to as a rapper like Pac, he doesn't look to him for how he should think and feel, and he points out the hypocrisy of how rappers are often vilified in society and seen as villains, yet people also expect them to be heroes by being leaders in activism. It's really an unfair place to put rappers or any celebrities in. He also points out that rappers are now so scared of being canceled that they self-censor their songs. Auntie Diaries, this is it. The most controversial song on the album, probably the most controversial song of the year. And it's no coincidence that he was talking about rappers being politically correct on the previous song. He does not bite his tongue here. Maybe the best and simplest opening bar of the year. He says, "My auntie is a man now," concise but intriguing in a way to make you want to listen to everything else that he's about to say. A great way of describing his uncle, too. You get a vivid image of him. This is very Nas-esque in his description of this person, so you feel like you know him. That is very intentional, so we can see him as a real person and not just a woman that decided to become a man at some point in her life. And verse 2, we're hit with the first of many F words. Right or wrong to use it, what Kendrick is saying is true. It used to be used for comedy like it was nothing. I mean, has anyone watched Eddie Murphy's Raw recently? It's really hard to get through or see as funny at all due to that constant term and some of his disparaging remarks for trans people. That kids on the playground too, they used to use it as the number one insult. I think kids are evolving now, and songs like this actually help that. In addition to his aunt having a sex change, he talks about his cousin Demetrius becoming Mary Ann. He said the family was in denial, but he always knew and accepted him even as a kid, even as he was saying these words as a kid. He accepted and loved his cousin. And the music begins to escalate and become more intense, but it also has a feeling of enlightenment as he starts to talk about the church being against his cousin and his cousin being conflicted between his lifestyle and what he thought to be his faith. And Kendrick tells the preacher and congregation what's up as he says he chose humanity over religion, with a twist at the end of this song that reminds me of the lyrical structure similar to Blacker the Berry. Kendrick references the famous video of him calling out a white female fan on stage who was rapping the N-word, and he had to tell her that she's not allowed to say that, shouldn't have had to tell her. But here he's saying something about this F word too, because he says if we're okay with saying this word, then we also have to be okay with a white girl saying the N-word, pointing out that neither is okay. And I understand the concern over Kendrick's excessive use of it here, though the point is to show how disgusting and wrong it was. While a lot of his audience may be enlightened, Kendrick also knows that he reaches a very wide audience. So this is a statement and works to educate people who may not know. Without the explicitness of the lyrics, the message wouldn't reach as many people. And don't forget, rap has come a long ways toward acceptance. Check out Murs' song and video for Animal Style, Murs, if you haven't seen that one. I was very shocked when that came out, given what rap was like, but that pushed it along with that Macklemore song. But rap still has a long way to go, and an artist as big as Kendrick making a song like this in support of LGBTQ people furthers that evolution exponentially. Mr. Morale, crazy beat here by Beach Noise and Pharrell. He goes on to introduce the ideas of generational trauma. He says, I think about Robert Kelly. If he weren't molested, I wonder if life will fail him. I wonder if Oprah found closure the way that she postered the hurt that a woman carried. Much of what this album is about is summed up in an idea he expresses on The Heart Part 5, where he says, hurt people hurt people. And that's really what he's talking about here. He goes on to say that his mom was abused. That's something that'll be explored in heavy detail on the next track. Mother, I Sober. This is the trademark epic song for this project. This is like the Sing For Me, I'm Dying of Thirst in structure. It really seems to be Kendrick processing everything brought up in therapy and displaying his newfound understanding of himself. He describes his mom being abused and wanting to do something about it when he was 5, judging himself harshly for not doing anything, carrying that trauma of seeing her getting beaten and having the guilt for not doing anything, even though he was just a small child. Then he has a very poignant line. He says, transformation, you ain't felt grief till you felt it sober. He restates this line in the second verse to also make it about feeling guilt, something that we'll see that he was coping with in his own way, the wrong way. And did I mention on the chorus, we got the great Beth Gibbons from Portishead. Huge W for Kendrick to get her here. She's getting a lot of love lately in hip hop, considering that Huss Kingpin dropped Portis Huss last year. If you're just a mainstream fan and you haven't heard Huss Kingpin's Portis Huss, please check that out. That was my number 2 album of last year. Beth Gibbons still has that spooky but angelic voice here. And in the third verse, K-Dot reveals that his mom's trauma from sexual abuse was passed down to him, as she was insistent that he was molested by his cousin, despite always saying that he wasn't. He also reveals that his trauma didn't express itself in drugs or alcohol and addiction to that, but in a lust addiction. That's how he dealt with his problems. And he hurt his wife and family as a result. And that kind of seems to be the catalyst for him to get into therapy. So the sober that he's referring to here is not soberness from drugs, but from lusting after other women. And I love how the violin kicks in as Kendrick gets more passionate with the lyrics. They did such a great job with the production being as expressive as the rhymes on this, helping to convey the feelings. During this part, Kendrick says, a conversation not being addressed in black families, the devastation hot in generations and humanity. They raped our mothers, then they raped our sisters, then they made us watch, then made us rape each other. Psychotic torture between our lives we ain't recovered. By the end of the song, he sets all this free, everything that he has been carrying with him, that's been holding him back, that's been making it come out in self-destructive ways. He's moving into acceptance. This is him no longer being a big stepper and tap dancing around the issue. It's him addressing his and his family's trauma directly. And then we get the very upbeat Mirror, reflective of how he has chosen to live his life with hope outside of trauma and not trying to be all things to all people. He says, I choose me, I'm sorry. And that actually says a lot. He didn't owe us returning sooner than 5 years. He chose to work on himself. And this is his answer to things he was struggling with previously, like on Crown trying to please everybody, and on Savior, people not being happy for him or seeing him as a real person. He has found a way to successfully cope with his trauma by addressing it head on, acknowledging it, and choosing himself. This really ends up being a very straightforward album for Kendrick, though there's still a lot to analyze and unpack. The most hard-hitting lyrics are pretty direct. He bluntly talks about his family, trauma, the need for therapy, the expectation on Black celebrity, cancel culture, and ultimately his dedication to himself and his family. There was so much hype for this. It was almost an insurmountable goal of living up to the expectations people had built in their head, but I think he pulled it off and may now be considered the most consistent MC of all time. This is an AOTY contender. It doesn't have it in the bag, but it's a contender. Right now it'd be up against Billy Woods and Sadistic for me, all three lyrical masterpieces, but this is in that conversation. I give this a 10 out of a 12 pack. Thank you for watching my review of Kendrick Lamar's Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. If you like this, go ahead and hit like now and hit me up in the comments. If you didn't like it, also let me know why in the comments. I drop hip-hop and hops-related content consistently, so subscribe to my channel now. And until I see you next time, keep buzzing. Fucking man says subscribe.
But if he's on his channel saying that somebody's album is better than mine, unsubscribe to that motherfucker.
No, your album's the best, man.
There you go. Subscribe.
Yeah.
Subscribe.